This is Michael Spedden, and welcome to Fowl Players Radio, your one-stop shop for all of your pop culture needs. We feature interviews from musicians, actors, comics, dancers, authors, and much, much more, up-and-coming artists and beloved favorites. We've got it all, people on stage, backstage, out front, and behind the scenes. Sit back and relax. Let's have some fun.
Hi, this is Kathy Ladman, and you're listening to Fowl Players Radio, the place where you get all of your good news information. Not really, but it's just a great show.
Hey, Mary Jo Peel here, and you are listening to Fowl Players Radio.
Hey folks, Michael Spedden here. Welcome to Fowl Players Radio. Tonight we have Adele Abrams on. Adele was, for over 14 years, a DJ on WHFS, and there was just a great documentary, which is on public television now, about WHFS when it was 102.3 and then became 99.1 a little bit later. It's a very, very interesting documentary, and WHFS really did a lot of great things for the music scene in Maryland and DC, and it's well worth catching if you get the chance to do it. And Adele is also another thing that we have in common. We're both in our day job lives. We're both in the occupational safety and health field. She's an attorney, and I've heard her speak before. She does a great job, and I really enjoyed interviewing her, and I think you'll enjoy the interview. You'll enjoy the history of the WHFS, and I think you're going to have a good time tonight. So again, remember, we're at www.fowlplayersradio.com, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@fowlplayersradio. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll be back right after these words.
Hi, I'm Emmy Jo.
And I'm Doug, and we're from the New Zoo Review, and you're watching Fowl Players Radio.
Hi, folks. This is Jay David, and you're listening to Fowl Players Radio.
And here we are again on Fowl Players Radio. I'm Michael Spedden, and tonight we have Adele Abrams. We all just saw the HFS documentary that aired on PBS not too long ago, and I've kind of known Adele professionally in the ever-present day job for many years. We're colleagues. I've seen her speak about occupational safety and health quite a bit. However, we're not here to talk about that tonight. WHFS. I mean, the documentary that I saw about it, just to kind of introduce, I wasn't aware of how far back WHFS went. I listened to WHFS starting in the 80s, the mid 80s when I was a teenager. I'd first heard of it 99.1. Up until the point I turned on WHFS one day and I heard Spanish music.
El Sol.
El Sol.
Yeah.
So our guest Adele was a DJ on WHFS from the mid 70s until you said around 88. Maybe a little past.
That's right. From 74 to 88.
Okay, so welcome, Adele. It's great to
Thank you.
have you here. I've been wanting to do this for a while. I'm glad that you were gracious enough to join us tonight. This, I have to say that was probably one of the more interesting documentaries and something that's just right up my alley that I didn't even realize all that history before. Quite a station HFS was.
Well, I didn't know a lot of that history until they made the movie. I
Right.
started there in 74.
Mhm.
And of course, the station had been on in the 60s as easy listening. Then it had
Mhm.
transformed. Murray the K had a show on there at one point. But the seed of the eclectic, free form music programs came with Spirit is Cheese.
Mhm.
And that was in the late 60s. And that was brokered time. At that time, the station wasn't paying any DJs to play rock and roll or, hippie music. But this group from Bard University, Bard College, that included Josh Brooks, who ended up being a longtime HFS DJ, as well as Mark and Sarah. Who were friends of his from college. And they were all friends with Steely Dan, too, by the way. So, it was an interesting crowd they ran with, I guess.
Love it.
But they brokered it. And when Jake Einstein, the owner, saw that they were making money doing it, he got the idea, well, maybe I should just, do this and
Mhm.
keep the ad revenue. But what really kind of tipped the scales on it was one night Sarah played a Fire Sign Theater album that was hot off the presses, and there was a reference in it to self-pleasuring. I'll put it that way. I don't want to get you in trouble.
Oh
And
no,
somebody
this is
somebody
strictly a
contacted.
podcast.
They,
No, don't worry about that.
so I can say anything then, huh?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Uh-oh, uh-oh. Unleash the Kraken here. But, they called the FCC, and we didn't get in any trouble with the FCC, but Jake used that as an excuse to fire Sarah, and then Mark quit in solidarity. And
Mhm.
so I guess Josh became the first paid DJ there, and the rest was history. So
Mhm.
that all happened right around 1969. And then I was listening to the station. I came down to Maryland to go to college in 1970. And I was a New Jersey, New York City area kid. So I was listening to the stations up there growing up. And, I was interested in being a DJ, probably since I was a little kid. But I came down to Maryland, enrolled in business administration because that's what my dad wanted me to do, switched over into journalism and radio, TV, and film pretty quickly. And then I started working on WMUC, which was the University of Maryland station.
Oh, well, sure.
And
Yeah.
and I found WHFS because all the cool kids listened to it, of course. And,
Yeah.
probably shamelessly was ripping off, segues and stuff initially. But what HFS did for me was it opened up the world of music to me.
Mhm.
I mean, I knew rock and roll. I was a musicaholic. I played piano from the time I was 5 years old. So, I knew a variety of types of music. But the things I was hearing on HFS were just blowing my ears off, and uh, realizing how you could take the music and make it an art form. That was what really caught me, the segues, and so that was what I tried to emulate. And, that was the thing that really made HFS special,
Mhm.
was the sets and the segues and the themes. And, I had somebody call me one night and they said, I started playing guitar along with the first song in your set, and you've stayed in the same key the whole time for 40 minutes. And I
What's
was
that?
like, yes, somebody got it. I'd try to do weird stuff like that. And you know, I like to say a lot of DJs are probably failed musicians. Some of them are probably very good musicians, but I'll put myself in the didn't have the chops to make it professionally category. But what you know not just myself, but the others who worked with me there, we were able to almost use the songs as an instrument to turn it into something else, and you
Mhm.
know, and have this continuity. I used to say, if I could start a set off with Emmylou Harris and end it with Miles Davis, and have there be a continuity through the whole set, then
Mhm.
that was like perfection right there. Um, so there really was a real, you know, uh, I guess not. I'm trying to think of the word for the creativity. I really enjoyed that part of it, in
Mhm.
addition to just listening to the music that other people were making that I thought was good music.
Yeah. Yep.
Being able to work with the music that way, and HFS afforded me that and afforded the other DJs there. Where else, would you hear NRBQ, and then you'd hear Ambrose Thibodeau, and then
Mhm.
you'd hear PDQ Bach, and then you might hear Miles Davis or Emmylou Harris or the Flying Burrito Brothers, and then you'd be hearing a Long Dead song, and then Little Feat would come on, and
Mhm.
we'd have a good old time.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I'm a DJ myself now on 97 Underground. That we're back and we're online now. It's not over.
Oh,
It's not
cool.
terrestrial. But I do the same thing with my show now. It's mostly hard rock and heavy metal. We do have that, but there's so much in that world where you can really mix it up. My show's called The Back of the Rack, where I call it
Ah,
songs you forgot you liked. I call them team player songs, where the song may not be the hit off of an album, but it was one of the ones that made the album great.
mm-hmm.
Almost like a best supporting actress song.
I like it. I like
Yeah,
it.
something along those lines. And then also too, HFS, for years, I was able to, and as we were talking before we started, and we're jumping at Nisi, helped
Mm-hmm.
my band. She gave my band at the time, Orange Seed Parade, she gave us some spins back then. She was very gracious to us, very nice. And that really seems like that, HFS just was an open door. Any kind of music there. I mean, you could get turned on to a lot of great things. It's almost like, hey, I got this great album. Let's everybody hear it.
Well,
Uh, you know,
let me speak to that a little bit though
sure.
on
Yeah,
the
please,
on the
please.
local music, because that was really something very near and dear to my heart.
Mhm.
I went out and heard a lot of bands. I knew the people who were in the local bands.
Yeah.
It was at that time a very, and it still is. I want to be clear, a very supportive musical community that we had,
Oh, I loved it.
and
Yeah.
I made a point to always play, a handful of local songs on my show every time that I do a show. And then for a while, and you may or may not, this was probably before your time listening to HFS,
Hmm.
but when we were still over at 102.3,
Right. Right.
we did a show called Take One from the Sounds Reasonable recording studio in DC at DuPont Circle. And Weasel and I hosted that. And we had local bands come in and play live, and we would broadcast live and interview them. And
Mm.
again, I wish some of those tapes were around. I know one of them we did it was Raz,
Oh,
and there
wow.
is an extant tape of that someplace because I've heard it before. Maybe it's online someplace.
Hmm.
And Bill Holland and Ren Stu and Tim Ironman and East Coast Offering and just a bunch. I
Hmm.
think Slicky Boys may have done it. So it
Sure.
was
Yeah.
really a mix. The Nighthawks probably did it,
Hmm.
and so we did that for quite a while, in addition to the regular shows we were doing. But
Right.
I ended up right toward I won't say the end of my HFS period because it was 85 to 88. I ended up hosting a TV show on Montgomery County cable television called Tacoma Tempo.
Oh,
And
okay.
it originated, I lived in Tacoma Park at the time. And some of those same bands that I always was playing, and Take One and on HFS, they came in. We hosted it from a club called Bosco's on Piney Branch Road. And
Hmm.
they would play a live set before a live bar audience,
Hmm.
and I would interview them. And there are about a half a dozen of those shows out on YouTube, and they're funny as hell, especially Butch Willis. If you ever ran across him, who is a pure life form, but he had a band. One of the people in it was like a Tuvian throat player, and
Oh my.
I hadn't run into that one before. Um,
Wow.
so we had some great fun, but the Dinettes did it. Beatnik Flies, Switchblade,
Hmm.
Pete Kennedy, Dan Hovey, if you know him, the solo guitarist, or he was the lead guitarist with the Nighthawks for a while as well.
Oh,
But
sure. Yeah.
he did the theme song for my TV show,
Oh,
so
nice.
that was all kind of cool. So really, the interest I had in trying to really promote the local music scene, and help, where you could give exposure to these amazing musicians we had in the DC area that started on HFS, ended up, carrying through the recording studio. And, when we taped those shows, it was recording studio quality. This guy, Joe, who I'm blanking on his last name now, who was the engineer, was mixing albums for, real money during the day. And then he was doing these to assist us. And these bands would come away with a studio quality live recording. So that was like one of the gifts of the show too, which
Love it.
was just phenomenal.
Mhm.
But that to me was one of the best parts of the job, was really being able to turn people on to
Mhm.
music that they hadn't heard before, whether it was national bands or whether it was from the local scene.
Right. Well, something, I think you and I must be cut from the same bark here because uh, my show's 2 hours a week. It's Mondays 2 to 4, and at least a half hour of that time is spent with bands from the Mid-Atlantic region.
Great.
Yeah. And sometimes I go a little outside, if they're indie bands or if they're unsigned and they're trying to get their stuff played, I have bands from as far away as Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, but I call it my Mid-Atlantic Music Marathon. And then I
Yeah.
usually do I usually do at least an interview, usually with either a national or a local act. But I guess with you, I guess I could kind of talk about this with you too. Back in my playing days, I played primarily Baltimore, did good bit of DC, New York, Northern Virginia, a little bit of PA, Delaware, but the Baltimore and DC are completely different animals
They really are. Yeah.
when it comes to that. The thing that I find about Baltimore, the bands were good. The bands looked good, sounded good, but everybody was the same. Everybody was very, very close in style and look.
Hmm.
You go to DC, it was just a whole hodgepodge of just about everything. People were open-minded to the point where a lot of bands that we were not even in the same genre as, we were on the bill. I think, the first time we did 930, we were on the bill with a reggae band. And people down there, it's almost like it's all good,
Hmm.
and I really enjoyed my time playing down there. And some of the clubs, 930, the 15-minute club, were just great. They were just great. And
I remember going to all of those in the
yeah.
original 930 on F
Hmm.
Street. At the really when it was the Atlantis Club before that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was when it was really like one of the first punk club, I guess.
Yeah.
And that wasn't my scene as much. New wave I liked,
Hmm.
but the local punk bands I dug, and
Oh yeah.
I would go to hear them. I wouldn't necessarily throw myself into a national punk scene, with a mosh pit and stuff. But to me, it's always like good music is good
Hmm.
music,
It is. It is.
and you know it doesn't all have to be pretty music.
Hmm. Right. Right.
And it doesn't have to be melodic music. For me, if it has the energy, that's what attracts me.
Right.
And artists who can kind of do both. I mean, I just saw Neil Young a couple of weeks ago at the Hollywood Bowl, which was a trip.
Hmm.
And what I've always loved about him is he can do something like Harvest Moon that makes you want to cry or make love,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then he can do, Rust Never Sleeps, out of the blue into the black, and just be thrashing as hell.
Hmm.
And, would be right at home on, a Pearl Jam or a Foo Fighters album or something.
Right. Right.
And, he's still out there delivering it. It's amazing. Um, but that what you're saying, I wonder, because I've noticed that as well, that the Baltimore versus DC historically anyway.
Hmm.
And I think it's this, in part. Baltimore is a hometown. It's a community people grow up there, they live there, they listen to the same stuff, they know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And DC has always been more of a transient town. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it's like, I'm not, I'm not from here, I just came here kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, I'm an import, many of the people that I was friends with, even at University of Maryland, were from all over the place. And so DC, you also have it as the political center. You have people from every state coming to work in DC as young people, working for government, working for Congress. And that impacts the social scene.
It
So
does.
you've
Yeah.
got a much more eclectic, group of people, I think, in DC, whereas you have more, homogeneity in Baltimore, which
You're
is
right.
great
Yeah.
because I've always said I love Baltimore in some ways more because you do have these neighborhoods.
Mhm.
You've got Patterson Park and you've got, Little Italy and you've got the Greek area and, like I say, generations of people. We don't have generations of people for the most part coming out of DC.
Right, right, right. You're right about that. You're right about that. Another thing too, with these scenes as well. Yeah, again, a lot more open-minded, a lot more eclectic down there. I mean, some of it did kind of rub off up here. I can remember, as the '80s were starting to come to an end, um, a lot more people really started getting into 99.1.
Well, they had a
Towards
better signal, so that was part of
that
it.
was part, yeah, part of it right
You
there. Yeah,
couldn't get 102.3 up in Baltimore,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and people would try boosters and all of that. I mean, it was always a running joke. I
Mhm.
may even have mentioned. I think I mentioned it in when I was interviewed for the movie. I can't remember if it made the cut or not, but I said, when you'd look for a place to live, one of the criteria was could your apartment or the house get HFS, and if it couldn't, then screw it. Move on to the next place. And people would be despairing. I could only get it in my car. They'd sit out in
Yeah.
the damn car listening, to music half the night.
Mhm.
So. But when we moved over to 99.1, we were in Annapolis.
Yeah.
And so suddenly we were Baltimore, Washington, Annapolis. I think that was what we would say. Not
Yep.
WHFS 99.1, Baltimore and Washington and Annapolis.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, um, our audience tripled. But at the same time, the station did change nature even before it was sold.
Right. Right.
David Einstein, who was the program director and the owner's son, and Jake owned HFS when we
hmm
moved. Um, he wanted, I think, this time because we had more of a reach to make more of a market impact, to help sell ads, be able to show some numbers. We never gave a shit about Arbitron back in the day because we never registered on it.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
so we could still kind of play what we wanted, but I can remember, kind of being told, like, dial back my folky stuff, somewhat. And okay, whatever, I can still
hmm
play whatever pretty much I want. And, at that point, I was doing Saturday mornings when we moved just from 10 to 2 because I had developed a real career in the meantime. Um, so, I pretty much could still play whatever I wanted on a Saturday morning.
hmm
But, they were going more to a harder sound, going more to the new wave, going more toward like the cuts, the cuts off of an album that would be on the sticker on the front of the album rather than just, oh, this is a cool album. Let me listen to all of it and play whatever I want off of it.
Right. Right. Right.
But, it was still informal. And then what happened, as I'm sure was in like 1988, Jake sold the station to Duchessois Communications. And at that point, we were told, they were going to be tightening it up and not so much having a playlist, but having more constraints.
hmm
And at that point, I had been doing it for 14 years. And I remember saying, if I can't pick my own music, why do I want to give up a weekend?
Sure.
It's tying me down. I can't travel on weekends. my loved ones go to the beach, and then I'm going behind on a Saturday afternoon, when everyone else goes down on Friday, and it just I love doing it,
Hmm.
but if I was going to lose that creative control, it wasn't what I had signed up for. And,
Yeah, yeah.
at that point, I was already working in government affairs. I wasn't a lawyer yet, but, I had started working for associations and doing OSHA, MSHA, safety and health work as part of my portfolio. And so it was like, well, it's time to close the door on that. And do I miss it? Pretty much every day.
Hmm.
Um, I still think in sets,
Right,
and
right.
fortunately, I'm still doing it a little bit. I do guest shots on WOWD, which is Tacoma Radio, and it's streaming as well as being accessible over the air. But Robbie White, who you probably know from Slicky Boys and the general punk scene in DC, his show Forbidden Alliance aspires, I'd say, is a good word, to be HFS like.
Yeah.
And and I'm saying that because he's upfront about these are things,
Mhm.
and so he's had me on as a guest DJ, probably, I don't think I'm up to a dozen times yet, but probably close to it. And I have a show booked to do with him on March 1st and on May 10th. So
Oh,
tune in and you
wonderful.
can catch me there. And he's planning in advance.
That that's wonderful. That's great, to be able to do that. But I totally understand what you're talking about with not having this, set playlist that you have to pick from. I mean, I love to look through my own collection of music, sharing things that I've always liked, and again, we are a little more of a single genre. I mean, you're not going to hear bluegrass on 97 Underground, but we do play, the hard rock, and that ventures in, a lot of areas, all the way from Journey, Boston sometimes, all the way through the Swedish death metal that you hear
I was going to
nowadays,
say, are you playing the international variety of things?
Yeah, I do. Again, I do focus a lot of my show, usually at least, 30 to 60 minutes with an interview, or 30 minutes also of what I call, again, my Mid-Atlantic Music Marathon.
Mhm.
And then, I do usually get about 5 or 6 albums from overseas a
Cool.
week, from a couple of record labels in Europe. Heavy metal never went out of style over there,
It's
you know.
funny. A number of years ago, maybe 6 years ago, seven, I went over to Iceland.
Hmm.
And while I was there, I wanted to go to their opera house, which is called the Harpa,
Hmm.
and is architecturally gorgeous. And my cousin had been, and she was like, "Go see whatever's playing. Just go to a show." And so I was prepared to like have it be opera or something. And the night that I went to get tickets, it ended up being an Icelandic, like heavy metal band that was being backed up by the Icelandic Symphony
Oh,
Orchestra.
wow, yeah.
And this was the weirdest freaking thing that I've ever heard. It was great, and it was all in Icelandic, so I didn't understand a word of it.
Hmm.
But again, the energy was there, and this the clash and synergy at the same time of these styles of music, it just about took your head off,
Hmm.
seriously.
I
So they're still, open in Europe, very inventive. And I used to DJ or not DJ, I used to engineer the foreign shows on WHFS.
Oh, wow, okay.
And that was my gig on Sundays. And it was I'd start off in the morning with Reverend Walter Kennedy doing the Old Ship of Zion, and then they'd have the Wake Alive and Jewish, and then
Hmm.
we moved to the countries, and we had Italy, and we had France, and
Hmm.
we had at one point in Brazil in Voces Ladas, and we had the Manoranjan Indian Hour, and at one point he had Jake had sold time to two different Korean groups who
Hmm.
apparently hated each other, and they used to like phone in threats to each other. We had the Afghanistan Relief Fund at one point,
Mhm.
but we also had Pat Troy, who owned Ireland's Own, doing an Irish show. And then the last show of the evening was Dr. Dredd doing the reggae show.
Okay, right,
And
right, right.
he brokered that time, and he owned Ross Records, real
Mhm.
authentic sound man. But Jake wouldn't let him run his own board, so he had to pay for me to be there as his engineer. So I became Nurse Dredd,
Oh, okay.
and that was great. And he would have some of these reggae musicians, coming into
Mhm.
the studio to perform live or do interviews, with the spleefs, and a good time was had by all.
Right.
But where I'm leading with this is, especially going back to like the Italian and the French show, those guys, although they would play the traditional Arrivederci Roma and
Mhm.
Volare and Serge Gainsbourg, they would also play like the cutting edge Italian and French rock and
Mhm.
roll. And
Yeah,
some
yeah.
some of it was heavy metal rock, and some of it was punk rock. I remember the Shiles, who played did the French show, used to like to play what's it, like Saint Plan pour moi, the Plastic Bertrand.
Mhm.
When that came out, he would play that over and over. So, and even the Indian show got me into Bollywood music. So, I actually, because of them, I would borrow records from them, and I would play this international stuff, mixing it in with American music on my regular HFS show. You
Awesome.
know, uh,
Awesome.
and I hadn't really thought about that in years, but you
Mhm.
know, uh, I never came across any Icelandic heavy metal when I was on the air, though. But
Right.
again, it was a place and time, as they used to say about DC space, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but it really was where you could just do all of that and just have a ball with it and really educate people
Mhm.
about music too. That was the real fun part of it,
Mhm.
was when people would call up and go, what in the heck was that, but in a good way.
Right, right, right. Well, with the bands that I'm getting in from Europe and everything, uh, the segment of that show. Sometimes I do a segment. I'll find four or five of them that I really like and put them into a segment, and I call that segment, "Yes, Virginia, there is great new music out there." As compared to because everybody's like, "Oh, there's no good new music out there." And I'm like, "Yes, there is." Both local and this stuff from
Yeah.
Europe, that it's good stuff. What did I want? What I wanted to ask too was Nadia, did you carry Dr. Demento too?
For a while, I think we were
Yeah,
playing that,
right.
and you had to pay for those services.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think at some point Jake realized that Weasel was pretty much our own Dr. Demento, and he didn't have to pay extra for it.
He really was.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. You're definitely right about that. Yeah, yeah.
but that stuff was great.
Mhm,
I used to listen to it, and uh, some of the collections, the
mhm.
compilations that Dr. Demento put out with, a lot of the stuff, one hit wonders, if they or if they were
Yeah.
even that,
Mhm,
they're coming to take me away, ha ha, hee hee, ho
mhm.
ho. And
Yeah.
grandma got run over by a reindeer and things like that. But he did find some definitely interesting weird stuff.
Right. Well, Weird Al Yankovic really got his career from being with Dr. Demento.
Oh
Um,
yeah, and Dr. Weird Al is a friend of my friend Phil here,
oh yeah,
who we
yeah.
were talking about before, and Weird Al's still out there. He's still touring. Uh, I've always really enjoyed his stuff myself, and again, that's
Mhm.
something I would play on HFS.
Right, right, right. Yeah. Yeah, he was just and he's got a movie. I really want to see his movie, but the one piece of his work that I really liked was the movie UHF, because it's about him pretty much with a skeleton crew running an independent television station. And I've had a lot of those folks from like WBFF. I've had Captain 20 on, Dick Dizell. I love that stuff. I love that. I've even written one of my murder mystery company. I've even written a murder mystery show
Oh, cool.
about a television station that they fired their beloved cooking show host and they brought in a horror host. And it's just like Vampira or something you would have seen back then. It's the host is kind of like that, and then there's corruption and all these other
Is
things.
this
But
is this a radio show that you do?
no, it's a live murder mystery show.
Okay.
Yeah, we perform in on trains, restaurants.
Now, I've seen some
Yeah.
of those out, but that's cool that you're involved in those.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I've got some good people with me. I'm very, very lucky with the people that I've been able to surround myself
yeah.
with, and it's just been awesome.
I,
Yep.
I I just had an odd kind of side track to my radio career just
Mhm.
this past month, which was I came along and got involved with the radio enthusiasts of Puget Sound, who had a convention and put on a series of basically 1940s radio dramas, and we acted them, and it was live streamed, but there was
Mhm.
a live audience as well. So I got to act in three of them.
Mhm.
And of course, Phil and also David Osmond, Phil Proctor and David Osmond from Firesign Theater
Yeah,
were
yeah.
both among the participants. Margaret O'Brien, who was, an old child actress, and quite a few people who are well known, especially in the radio trade. And it was just a phenomenal get together of all of these people, many of whom are senior citizens,
Mhm.
but still have wonderful radio voices. And, it gave me a real new appreciation
Mhm.
for what these were. I mean, I've heard, comic spoofs on the radio shows, but realizing, there wasn't television back then,
Mhm.
and these dramas that, the families would gather around. And one of them that I performed in was One Man's Family,
Mhm.
which it turns out it was the longest running radio drama in history. It was on for 28 years.
Yeah, yeah.
And the episode that I was in had to do with a family member having been captured in Germany and was in a concentration camp, and another member of the family went over there trying to find them, and one of their children, little children, was killed over there, and the boat was blown up. And this was bringing the war back home,
Mhm.
in a real meaningful way. And oh my God, the emotions, just reading these scripts. The writing was
Mhm.
so good. And that's something I think we lose a little bit sometimes in our TV shows these days. But
Mhm.
these things read like novels. They really did, just beautifully written. And so now I'm like, okay, let's do some more of these old radio shows. This is great. you
I
know
love it. I absolutely love that stuff. I've had some apps on my phone where I used to when I was working on my house I would listen to Jack Benny. I would listen to a lot of different ones from back in those days. Mel Blanc had his own show. I would listen to a whole bunch of those, and I would just binge them as I was working and stuff. And I absolutely love old radio and radio dramas. The fact that you can really shut your eyes to and really imagine it really adds something to it. I think
Well,
you
it's
yeah.
interesting you say that, because at this radio enthusiast
Hmm.
conference, there were quite a few blind people there,
Hmm.
relative to the total number of audience members. And at first I was like, what? And then I was like, oh yeah, of
Hmm.
course, radio, and the way they were doing this, we had sound, a couple of
Hmm.
sound effects people, and they had music coming in, doing the dramatic,
Hmm.
for transitions. But I would imagine if you aren't sighted, that might actually deliver a fuller picture of what's going on than hearing TV, where they tend to maybe rely on images
Hmm.
more, and don't make as much of an effort to create that kind of oral room
Hmm.
that you're in.
Right, right,
you know
and I really think too, old radio and the things you were talking about here, but also, and I'm sure Phil could agree with this. I really think comedy's taken a nosedive too. When it comes to I get a lot of reels, and I see stand-ups nowadays, and I'm just like, my God, what are they even thinking?
Mm.
Um, you know, yeah, maybe when I interview Phil, maybe he can weigh in on that. But
I'm sure he will. I'm
yeah,
sure he will.
yeah,
But
yep.
you have to be careful now. We cannot be funny.
I know,
You must not make jokes about the government,
I know. And
or you will end up in Uganda.
good Lord, I know. It's crazy. It's just, how did we get here? I don't. Well, anyway,
Well, I, again, this is something I've been talking about, with other folks, and boy, the arts in the end are one way, the last bastion of free speech.
mhm.
And, Phil came into working in Broadway and in Hollywood at the, kind of the end of the McCarthy era.
Oh
He
yeah, yeah.
knows people who were directly affected by that in a big way,
Mhm.
and I'm afraid, we're sliding into that again now.
Yeah, it's just yeah, it's I think the pendulum's got to swing back sometime soon. I'm hoping.
But when they're talking about revoking Rosie O'Donnell's citizenship,
Yeah, you can't do stuff like
and
that.
blackmailing stations over their FCC licenses,
Uh-huh.
conditional upon getting rid of some very good, genuinely good comedians.
Yeah, yeah. It's
We aren't just like on the precipice
right,
of a
right.
slippery slope. We're careening down it like the Jamaican bobsled team right
I
now.
know. It's the truth. It's really true, really true, and it's a shame. I'm just like I said. I'm just hoping that, uh, you know, I just it would be great if I had a fast forward button in my hand, but then when I finally hit play, will I recognize where I am?
Yeah,
you know.
it's like the old Time Machine movie with Rod Taylor, and he
Uh-huh.
pushes the thing, and suddenly, you're seeing the fashions changing in the window, and then suddenly it's total nuclear desolation.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
Wait, how did that happen? Did I go a little bit too far in the future?
Uh-huh.
But seriously, we need to protect the arts. I
Yeah.
feel very strongly about that. Like, what's happening at the Kennedy Center is breaking my heart. I know people who've lost their
Uh-huh.
jobs there now, who are in support roles, whether it's doing hair and makeup
Oh
or,
yeah, yeah.
involved with the musical or the dance programs. And, how do we come back from that? It's very scary. And as they say in Chicago, vote early and often, kids.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's another thing too. I mean, we've I, I mean, everything that we lost during COVID too, television shows, bands, tours, and things like that. But, you know, um, a lot of people took that time to kind of go back to the drawing board, and come back, even stronger. And I think, you know, I just believe that, maybe I'm being optimistic, who knows, but I think that, it can bounce back from this stuff too,
I certainly hope
yeah,
so. And,
yeah.
I'll add, for anybody who might be listening to this, support your public radio stations,
Hmm.
support, public television. You started off talking about the WHFS movie Feast Your Ears, the story of WHFS, which won an
Hmm.
Emmy.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
co-producer, so I'm going to throw that out there. Uh,
Hey, there
but,
you go.
but, it got sold to
Hmm.
PBS, and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
But what happens if PBS gets taken off the air? That means that movie never gets seen again.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, right, right,
there
right.
all of the content,
Hmm.
the educational content for kids, and
Hmm.
you know, Lord knows if they're closing public schools, we're going to need to have access to public television and public information.
Hmm.
So that's real important. Is when they do the drives, we joke about them, like, oh, here they go again, asking for money. but this time around, give it because they're really going to need it now that the federal funding is just being pulled out from under them.
Right, right, right. I mean, I'm thinking that, yeah, maybe there's other ways of funding it. I don't know. They do, aside from like funding, I guess that would have come from the government. They do, a lot of fundraisers, and the people. I got to tell you, like my mother, for example, she lives and dies by Maryland Public TV. That was probably a good 50% of what I watched her watch growing up. Was public TV. She used to love the Masterpiece Theater and the other
Sure.
shows that were on. And I mean, I think that there would be people willing to support, public television if the rug gets pulled out like that. I mean, I wouldn't have to say it's over with, but I would have to say that maybe if they're not going to get it from there, they could get it from somewhere else. I
Well,
knew.
the whole idea though is you don't want to have public radio beholden, to commercial entities. The whole idea was, is
Mhm,
the freedom of it basically, and we are losing it. I mean, look, they got rid of Voice of America, and curtailed that so broadly. Um, we have a real issue with the government suppressing information, studies from the FDA,
mhm,
and from National Cancer Institute, suddenly nothing is, the morbidity and mortality report that,
mhm,
epidemiologists rely upon. All of that information is being quashed and, quashing the public information through public radio, Pacifica, public television, that is part and parcel of
mhm,
clamping down. And then the networks are held hostage to the FCC controls.
mhm,
And while, certainly it was, beyond the pale to think that they would ever try to manipulate content by threatening licenses, boom,
mhm,
here we are. So again, I appreciate everybody, who do, like you, who can do streaming radio, and
mhm.
I appreciate the times that I'm offered a guest spot on
Yeah,
either WOWD or making contributions on KPFK. But
right,
both of those stations are public radio.
right, right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
even my limited ability to get my mojo on with music is being threatened by these cuts, and that's important.
Oh, it
So,
is, it is,
you
it
know,
is. But that's why I do what I do. I've had on this show 350 plus episodes.
wow, that's great.
Um, 300 starting back in 2018. Thank you, thank you. It started off again just looking for people in this area here because, as you know, as we have talked about earlier, you know, the music scene in this area has been very, very good, very unique. I've had a lot of bands that used to play Georgetown years ago. I've had, August, DC Star. I've had Face Dancer on.
I remember Face Dancer well.
Yeah,
They were a favorite of mine.
yep. Captain Chesapeake from WBFF 45, Dick Dizell, who was Captain 20. Um, you
They're
know,
all
uh,
captains up there in Baltimore, huh?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, Captain WDCA was DC. That's 20, but he was uh, um, people who were on the indie television stations, working with the skeleton crew. I know I've had some other people from WBFF on that were there in the
Mhm.
very beginning when it was small. This is a big history. This is history, and this is valid. And these stories, I think, my mission was to help have people tell their stories and preserve them so people can hear them. Am I sweeping the nation? Am I the hottest thing since sliced bread? No, but I think that what I do, it preserves this history.
Well, and that's important because
Yeah,
we are seeing revisionist history, aren't we?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and also there have to be alternative ways to reach the public
Hmm.
if indeed the more traditional uh, forms of communication get clamped down on or get controlled in
Right.
terms of their content. I jokingly, but not jokingly funny, really, have commented about when are we going to have to have our Radio Caroline,
Mhm.
broadcasting from international waters. You know, uh,
Yeah.
it could come to that someday. So
Mhm.
I just want to let you know, if anybody out there is planning a Radio Caroline, I'm available to be a DJ.
Sure. Hey, hey, I'd like to put you to work if I could find somehow to do it too,
Oh, I'm ready. I did get rid of some of my vinyl. I still have some of it though, but I
I
have
love
all
it.
my CDs, so I'm good to go.
Love it. Absolutely love it. So, I tell you what, you have a couple of minutes just to talk, occupational safety and health a little bit? I mean, we run into each other all the
Sure, sure.
time, so, your law practice, which you've had for how long now?
Well, I've been practicing law now for a little over 30 years.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I started off with a big firm and then for 5 years. And then I was the head of my own firm for 25 years in scenic Beltsville, Maryland.
Hmm.
But I was doing OSHA and mine safety work around the country.
Right.
And at my peak, we had 10 attorneys. And gradually, people started retiring on me. And eventually, like the story goes, and then there was one, and I decided I didn't want to retire yet. So in April of this year, I went over to Littler Mendelson,
Hmm.
and I'm working theoretically out of their DC office, but it's pretty much full remote.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can go in and use an office whenever I wanted. And in fact, I was going to today. We're
Hmm.
right around the corner from the White House and the Chamber of Commerce, literally on Connecticut Avenue.
Yeah.
And the office manager sent an email out first thing in the morning, due to, I guess, Netanyahu coming to the White House. you know 17th Street is closed, Pennsylvania Avenue is closed, G and H Street is closed. And I'm like, well, geez, I can't get there. So I ended up not going in and just working from home today. But
Hmm.
it is a change going from being, let's call it a 5 to 10 attorney firm, to being part of a 3,000 attorney international firm now.
Right. Right.
And as I've said to a few folks, I haven't had a boss in 25 years. This is weird, but they're pretty much allowing me to do my own thing, and
Hmm.
I was able to bring my clients from my firm over with me. So
Hmm.
it's working out pretty well. But before I became an attorney, I got involved with the safety and health side of things.
Oh.
And so, yeah, I was working on OSHA programs in the construction industry in the mid 80s.
Oh.
And then I went into the mining industry, this as construction aggregates, stone, sand, and gravel, starting in 89. And I was director of government affairs, but part of my portfolio was managing their safety and health programs. And that I was what I found really resonated with me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really developed a passion for that. And my background was not in that, but I self-educated as much as I could,
Hmm.
with the employer's blessing. I really got involved with the National Safety Council, and started going to some courses whenever I could. This was before there were such things as webinars, so you had to physically go to
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
I really got involved with that and developed a passion for it. And so then after that, while I was still doing that full time, I had the opportunity to go to law school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had always wanted to go to law school. My mother used to say, "You like to argue, you should be a lawyer." But you know, um, I had looked into doing it back before the safety stuff, back in the early '80s, and I took the LSAT and started the process. And I was engaged at the time, and I got married. And like once I got married, he's like, "Well, you can't go to law school. You've got two stepkids." And I'm like, "Oh." So I kind of put that on the side burner. And then after we got divorced,
Hmm.
uh, I had this opportunity to go and my employer paid for it. Where I was
Can't
doing
beat
this
that.
government affairs and safety work, and they said as long as you had a B or better, they paid 100% of tuition. I only had to buy books.
Mhm.
And so I'm one of the rare people who got through law school without any student loans. But it was 4 years, 5 nights a week for at least the first 2 years. And, I took some summer courses, and, it was a lot more arduous than I had expected schedule wise, but
Mhm.
I was glad that I did it. And I knew when I went into it that I wanted to do safety and health law. Now,
Right.
they don't have law school programs on that though.
Right.
So
Right.
my focus was really excuse me, employment law and environmental law. Those were the disciplines I took, administrative law. And, I have practiced a fair bit of employment law over the years as well. And I teach employment law at University of Colorado now, but that's online, so it works out. And I used to teach it at Catholic U as well.
Mhm.
So, it's morphed into some weird stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I mean, when I was, a 20-year-old hippie chick playing rock and roll on HFS, I
Mhm.
never thought I'd be like down in underground salt mines, for fun and profit. But I've seen some things.
Oh
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe we'll talk about all that another time. But I have to watch out talking about that stuff because statute of limitations and attorney-client privilege.
Certainly, yeah. You don't want to get anybody in trouble. Yeah,
But
I've
but I
yeah.
will tell you, I have seen some things definitely.
I have too. I have too. I did. I've and I'm not going to say like I've seen some things, but then I'm not going to. What I wanted to say too was I've been in a number of your talks. Now that's not tied to I've seen some things, but you're great. The thing that I always liked about your talks was that whenever something new was coming out, you have your lawyer brain and you're able to explain it in layman's terms. Because a lot of times when you look at stuff out of the Federal Register, I'm like, what am I reading? I'm like, but thank you. You've been such a resource to the community for such a
Oh,
long
thank you.
time. I got into it, and I won't, go on about mine, but I grew up in Dundalk. Three generations, both sides of my family were Bethlehem Steel. And my father was a lawyer. He did healthcare law. Um, and I didn't really want to go to law school, but I, got into cable TV, and I ended up being a supervisor. Went to another company, and then I taught bucket truck safety, pole climbing, flagger,
Oh yeah.
all those things. And then our friend Dan Souders hired me. I was in the Catonsville program as a student. He hired me for the Pentagon after 9/11. From there, BG&E, and where I am now, Chesapeake Employers Insurance. And I also worked for a couple of I had a couple of small jobs in between there too, just trying to find something permanent. But I also taught in the Catonsville program for 6 years.
Yeah, Dan had me in as a guest lecturer a few times. I don't know if you were a
Yeah.
student at the time when I did that or not, but
Yeah.
now I do it for Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
I,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do it at their School of Public Health, and I come in and teach a class like for 3 hours once a semester called MSHA 101. What do you mean I'm a minor?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
these master's program students and PhD candidates,
Mhm.
they're at the cusp of graduating, and very often they only know that there's there's OSHA. They
Yeah.
don't realize there's a sister agency out there. So, in
Mhm.
fact, for Littler, I just did a webinar on that exact topic, and they had, I think, a couple of hundred people registered for it. So, the radio career has been beneficial to me in that it's made me very comfortable doing webinars
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
podcasts, obviously. But the webinars, especially, that at my own firm became kind of a big part of my practice, where I was able to do a lot of paid webinars on safety and health issues.
Mhm.
And I have to be a little more judicious because Littler controls some of that a little bit more tightly because they have their own external webinar series. So they don't want me going in competition with them, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm still afforded that. And in fact, I'm doing some internal training for our occupational health and safety group this Wednesday coming up. And
Oh.
we'll have probably 30 attorneys from Littler around the country sitting in, and subject matter experts, of which I'm, I guess, senior counsel now over MSHA matters for the firm. You know, we each talk about a selected area of our specialty to inform the rest of the group. And, you know, the fact that they do that, I think, is wonderful. So that's one of the benefits now for me of being with a big firm, is that just the resources that are available, you know, but it's kind of like a fire hose too. There's so much there. And I was talking to our tech support guy today, and I was like, you got to understand, I'm old. I went through law school before there were computers. You really got to have mercy on me here. So, you know, just if I could comprehend all of the technology that's available to me there, you
Mhm.
know, I have no doubt I would be, you know, kicking ass even more than I do, but it's a process. I've only been there since April, and you know, I watched like 6 hours worth of training videos because it's all self-taught. You know, and that's, you know, the younger generation. That's the teaching methodology.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh God, I finally finished all those effing videos. And then they're like, oh no, that was just the introductory for the first week. And then there's like, you know, here's another 25 videos that you're supposed to watch. I'm like, shoot me now.
Right.
But
Right.
you know, it's a process. It's a process. I can do this, you know.
Right.
Uh, but and in the meantime, you know, I mean, the lawyering stuff I do because that's what I've always done. It's just that, how do I save a damn document? You know.
Yeah, I know.
And
Gosh.
you know, I appreciate all the layers of security they have, and you know, I realize, you know, that when you have a big firm, you've got to deal with that. But that to me has been the biggest, you know, issue transitionally in going from, you know, after 30 years, suddenly being in this new environment, and it's a paperless office. Oh my God, paperless office. I am like the original hoarder girl. And, you know, so that, you know, it's like, okay, we're going to pretend I'm having a paperless office. And in the meantime, my whole living room here is filling up with crates of paper.
I
So
know. And me
it's a
too.
little
Me too.
distressing. But I do love the safety and health work,
Yeah.
and you know, the people that I work with who are the safety professionals with the companies.
Hmm.
You know, as I like to put it, it's not a job, it's a vocation.
It is.
You
It
know,
is.
they really care about the people that they are there to protect, and you know, the ones who don't get out of the industry pretty quickly. You know,
They don't last. They don't
it's a
last.
self-selection thing.
It is.
And
Yeah.
you know, one of the biggest uh, I think positive changes I've seen is the recognition now about focusing on worker mental health as well as physical health. And
Very
that's
true.
something I have become really bullish on. I don't know if you say you've heard me speak a lot. I've done a fair bit of training now on psychological first aid
Hmm.
and suicide prevention because, you know, there's an awful lot in mining and construction, which are the really specialty areas for me. They have the highest suicide rates of any occupational categories.
Mm.
There was a University of West Virginia study a few years ago, found 30% of coal miners had considered suicide in the previous year.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And how do you manage a safety program if a third of your workforce is looking at offing themselves? So, you know, the recognition that this is happening out there, and a lot of it is because people are working in chronic pain.
Mhm.
You also have high rates of drug and alcohol abuse, um, you know, in those categories. And, you know, if somebody is told, hey, you know, you're 45 years old and you've blown your knees out laying tile and you can't do that anymore,
Mhm.
what do you do now?
Right. Right.
You know,
Exactly.
if you know, and the black lung issues in the mining industry,
Mhm.
silicosis, pneumoconiosis. You know, I've become a total geek on this stuff. It's so funny. It's like
Yep.
my brain is wired, and half of my hard drive can pull any musical lyrics out of the air and remember songs from 50 years ago that I haven't heard in 50 years. And the other side of mine is going, oh yes, the requirement to have cages around tires when you're changing a multi-part tire, that's 1910.77. What?
Mhm. Yep.
Like, where am I coming up with this stuff?
Mhm.
But I'm just glad my brain works at this point. I'll leave it at that.
Right, right. Well, Adele, it's been wonderful having you tonight. I absolutely enjoyed this, and I'm really grateful to you for being willing to come on and talk about your HFS days, talk a little safety with us. It's been delightful, and again, I truly enjoyed that documentary, and I appreciate you. I really do. And I have even more of an appreciation for what HFS really did for music in this area. It's just amazing. And again, having you on has been great. I just, half the reason I do this podcast is so I can listen to it too, because I love listening to people talk about their experiences from around here. And, it did, as I'd mentioned before, it originally start, just to really do this area here, but through different ways, I've ended up branching out to Broadway, Hollywood,
Hey, you're bad.
music,
You're nationwide.
anything. Yeah, nationwide. I just wish, I'm still a few $1,000,000 shy of being a millionaire, but hey, I love the show.
Oh, well, keep working on that. And in the
Yep.
meantime, protect the arts, protect the First Amendment and free
Mhm.
speech, and
Yep,
save
exactly.
us all.
Exactly. Well, thanks again. And folks, we will link in the show notes where you can see the HFS movie on PBS, usually pbs.com, or it's a pbs.com, but also on streaming services. You can
Yeah.
find it with the
If you
app.
have the PBS passport, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
free,
Mhm.
then you can watch it on demand. So
Exactly.
that's
Exactly.
do it today.
Well worth it. So, well, thanks again, Adele. And folks, thank you all for listening. We will see you all next time. Thanks again for tuning in tonight with our episode with Adele Abrams. I had a great time talking to her about the old days of WHFS and occupational safety and health, of all things, too. So thanks again, Adele. We appreciate you coming on. And I thank you all for listening. Remember, at Fowl Players Radio on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and Fowl Players Radio, www.fowlplayersradio.com is our regular website. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our episode with Adele Abrams, and we will see you all next time. Michael Spedden signing off.